And you would say that the first six you chose.
April 12, 2014, Pleasant Grove, Utah. A man is cleaning out the garage of his former family home. He's recently been released from federal prison, and he's trying to sort through old belongings. He opens a cardboard box expecting to find maybe old clothes or forgotten toys. Instead, he finds something wrapped in plastic. He unwraps it. It's the body of a tiny baby. And then he finds another one. And another. By the time police arrive, they've discovered 7 tiny bodies, all packaged in plastic bags and tucked away like forgotten storage items. The man who found them is Darren West, and the person who put them there is his ex-wife, Megan Huntsman. Now, before we go any further, I need to clear something up about the title of this video. You might have clicked on this thinking Megan Huntsman ended her son's life because of a new relationship. That's not what happened here. The internet has a way of twisting details, and this case has been misreported in social media posts and true crime forums. What actually happened is somehow even more disturbing, because there was no dramatic trigger, no single moment that explains this away. What Megan Huntsman did was methodical, repeated, and stretched across an entire decade. This is the story of 7 babies who passed away at the hands of their own mother, and 3 daughters who grew up in the same house with no idea their mother was pregnant 7 separate times. Let's talk about who Megan Huntsman was before April 2014. She lived in Pleasant Grove, a small city in Utah County, with a population of about 33,000 people. It's the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where families are tight-knit, and where the community is largely influenced by values of family and faith. Pleasant Grove sits at the base of the Wasatch Mountains, about 30 miles south of Salt Lake City. It's beautiful, quiet, and the kind of place where people raise families because it feels safe. The crime rate is low. The schools are decent. It's suburban America in every sense of the word. Megan married Darren West when she was young, and together they had 3 daughters. By all outward appearances, they were a regular family. Megan was described by neighbors as quiet and kept to herself, but not in a way that raised red flags. She wasn't the neighborhood gossip, but she wasn't a recluse either. She was just there, invisible in her normalcy, the kind of person you might wave to from across the street, but never really have a conversation with. People who knew her said she seemed like a typical mom. She took care of her kids. She maintained her home. There was nothing about her that screamed danger or instability. And that's part of what makes this case so disturbing. Because the people we fear are usually the ones who look and act differently. But Megan Huntsman looked like everyone else. But between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman was living 2 completely different lives. During this 10-year period, she became pregnant 7 times beyond the 3 daughters she was raising. And each time she hid the pregnancy from everyone, including her own family living in the same house. When it came time to give birth, she did it alone. And then, according to her own confession, she ended the lives of 6 of the babies either by strangulation or suffocation immediately after they were born. 1 baby was stillborn, meaning it passed away before or during birth, and she was not charged with that death. But the other 6 were born alive. They took breaths. And then Megan ended their lives within minutes. Think about what that means for a second. She hid 7 pregnancies from her husband, from her 3 daughters, from extended family, from neighbors, from everyone. How does someone do that? Megan wore baggy clothing. She isolated herself when her body started showing. She gave birth in secret, likely in the bathroom of her own home, while her family was elsewhere in the house or away. She never went to a hospital, never had prenatal care, never told a single person. And after each birth, after each infant passed away, she wrapped the tiny bodies in plastic, sometimes multiple layers, and put them in cardboard boxes in the garage. Then she went back to her life, made dinner, helped her daughters with homework, went to bed, and nobody knew. Let me paint a picture of what this actually looked like in practical terms. Pregnancy is not easy to hide. Your body changes dramatically. You gain weight, your belly grows, you have morning sickness, your body changes in obvious ways. Toward the end, the baby moves visibly. You waddle when you walk. You can't bend over easily. And yet Megan hid all of this 7 separate times. She must have worn extremely baggy clothes, layers even in warm weather. She probably avoided situations where her body would be visible, like swimming or close physical contact. She likely timed the visible stages to periods when she could be more isolated. And when labor started, she had to find a time when she was alone in the house, or at least in a part of the house where no one would hear her. Because labor is painful. Women cry out during labor, and she did this at least 6 times, maybe 7, without anyone noticing. During this time, Megan Huntsman was struggling with methamphetamine addiction. This is important because during her arrest and throughout the legal process, this became part of the explanation, though not an excuse. Substance use can cause paranoia, erratic behavior, and severely impaired judgment. It can also suppress appetite and cause weight loss, which might have helped her hide the physical signs of pregnancy. When you're using certain substances regularly, your body doesn't function normally. You can go days without eating. You can lose dramatic amounts of weight even while pregnant, which might make the pregnancy less visible. This kind of substance use also affects your brain chemistry in ways that make you detached from reality, less able to feel empathy, more focused on short-term problem solving than long-term consequences. But here's the thing that makes this complicated. Megan stopped using methamphetamine around 2006 or 2007, and that's when the incident stopped too. After she got clean, she didn't get pregnant again, or if she did, she didn't harm the baby. Does that mean the substance use made her do it? That's what some people argued. But plenty of people struggle with addiction and don't harm their children, let alone 6 of them over 10 years. The methamphetamine was a factor in her life, but it doesn't answer the deeper question of how someone becomes capable of this. Addiction can explain impaired judgment in a moment of crisis. But 6 separate decisions over a decade? That's harder to explain away with substance use alone. Her 3 living daughters had no idea any of this was happening. They grew up in that house, playing in rooms just feet away from where their mother was giving birth in secret. They had no idea they had 7 siblings who never made it past their first moments of life. Imagine being those daughters now, as adults, trying to process that information. Your mother, the person who raised you, fed you, tucked you in at night, was simultaneously causing the deaths of babies and hiding them in the garage. How do you reconcile that? How do you ever feel safe in your own memories again? Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every school event where your mom was present, you now have to wonder, was this before or after one of these incidents? Was she storing a body in the garage while she was helping me with my science project? It affects every memory. It makes your entire childhood feel different. The house itself at 358 West 200 North in Pleasant Grove became a crime scene. It's a modest single-family home, nothing fancy, the kind of place you'd drive past without a second glance. After the discovery, investigators spent days searching every inch of the property. They brought in specialized dogs trained to detect remains. They checked the yard for any signs of additional evidence. They processed the garage where the boxes had been stored. Neighbors came out to watch, standing on their porches in shock as police vehicles lined the street. Some of them had lived next door to the Wests for years. They'd watched those 3 daughters grow up. And now they were learning that the friendly, quiet neighbor had been hiding something that most people can't even imagine. If this case is making your jaw drop, hit subscribe because on Accused, we dig into the cases that haunt us. New episodes every week, so how did this finally come to light? Darren West, Megan's ex-husband, had been in federal prison on unrelated substance-related charges. The couple had separated, and by the time he was released in early 2014, Megan was no longer living in the Pleasant Grove home. Darren went back to the house to clean it out and sort through belongings. That's when he opened the box in the garage. He immediately called the police. When investigators arrived, they found 7 bodies total, all newborns or infants, all in various states of decomposition because they'd been there for years, some as long as 18 years. The police response was immediate and significant. The Pleasant Grove Police Department, a small force that rarely deals with major crimes of this nature, suddenly had one of the biggest cases in the city's history on their hands. They called in the Utah County Sheriff's Office. They brought in forensic specialists. The medical examiner's office had to carefully process each tiny body, trying to determine cause of death on remains that had been deteriorating for nearly 2 decades. It was painstaking work. These weren't adult bodies with obvious signs of trauma. These were newborns, some of them so small and fragile that determining exact cause of death was nearly impossible. But the medical examiner was able to determine that 6 of the 7 babies had been born alive and then passed away from asphyxiation or strangulation shortly after birth. Police brought Megan in for questioning. And this is where it gets chilling. She confessed almost immediately. There was no drawn-out denial, no lawyer stopping her from talking. She just admitted it. Yes, she said, I gave birth to all of them. Yes, I caused their deaths. All of them except one who was stillborn. She told investigators she strangled or suffocated the babies right after they were born. She said she was using substances during that period of her life and didn't want the babies. She was calm during the confession, detached, like she was talking about something that happened to someone else. Detectives who interviewed her later said it was one of the most unsettling interrogations they'd ever conducted because there was no emotion. No tears, no anger, no remorse. Just flat, factual statements about what she'd done. In her confession, Megan provided details that only someone who had actually committed these acts would know. She described where in the house she gave birth. She explained how she wrapped the bodies. She remembered approximate years for some of the births. She admitted that she acted alone, that Darren had no knowledge of what she was doing. This last detail was crucial because investigators needed to rule out Darren as a potential accomplice or someone who might have known. How could a husband not know his wife was pregnant 7 times? It seems impossible. But investigators verified Darren's timeline and found that during several of the pregnancies and births, he was actually incarcerated on substance-related charges. He physically couldn't have known because he wasn't there. And when he was home, Megan's concealment tactics had apparently worked. DNA tests confirmed that all 7 babies were biologically hers and Darren West's. The medical examiner determined that 6 of the deaths were homicides and 1 was a stillbirth. The timeline was confirmed. The incidents happened between 1996 and 2006. Darren West was cleared of any involvement. In fact, during some of the births and deaths, he was already in prison on other charges, making it impossible for him to have known or participated. By all accounts, he was genuinely horrified by the discovery. This was the mother of his children, a woman he'd spent years of his life with, and he had no idea she was capable of this. In interviews, Darren said he was devastated and shocked. He said he wished he had known, wished he could have stopped it, wished he had paid more attention. But the reality is that Megan had become an expert at deception. She had compartmentalized her life so completely that even the person living with her had no clue what was happening. Megan Huntsman was charged with 6 counts of murder. Each count carried a potential sentence of life in prison. Utah allows for capital punishment in the most serious cases, so theoretically, she could have faced that. The prosecution had to decide whether to seek the maximum penalty. In Utah, this level of punishment is reserved for the most serious crimes, and this certainly qualified. 6 babies who passed away over a 10-year period. Premeditation, no clear circumstances that would explain or excuse the behavior. But there were complications. Megan's defense team was preparing to argue that her methamphetamine addiction had significantly impaired her mental state during the time of the incidents. They were going to bring in expert witnesses to testify about the psychological effects of long-term substance use. They were going to paint a picture of a woman who was not in control of her faculties, who was trapped in addiction and making decisions she wouldn't have made if she'd been sober. The prosecution knew that a trial would be long, expensive, and emotionally traumatic for everyone involved, especially for Megan's 3 surviving daughters. There would be difficult testimony about what happened to the babies. There would be evidence presented. The defense would put Megan's addiction and mental health on full display. And at the end of it all, there was no guarantee about the outcome. Juries can be unpredictable, especially in cases involving women and mental health issues. So the prosecution made a decision. They offered Megan a plea deal. In 2015, Megan Huntsman accepted the plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to all 6 counts in exchange for the maximum penalty being taken off the table. She was sentenced to 6 concurrent life sentences with the possibility of parole. Under Utah law, that means she has to serve at least 30 years before she's eligible for parole. So the earliest she could be released is sometime in the 2040s, when she'd be in her 70s or 80s. Even then, parole is not guaranteed. The parole board would have to review her case, consider her behavior in prison, assess whether she poses a risk to society, and make a determination about whether she deserves a second chance at freedom. At her sentencing hearing, the judge called it one of the most difficult cases he'd ever seen in his career on the bench. He said he struggled to find words adequate to describe what Megan had done. Prosecutors described it as a 10-year span of calculated decisions. They argued that each pregnancy was an opportunity for Megan to make a different choice, to seek help, to tell someone, to let the baby live. And each time, she chose a different path instead. They emphasized that this wasn't a one-time act of desperation. This was a pattern. This was a woman who knew what she was doing and did it anyway, over and over again. But Megan's defense attorneys painted a different picture. They talked about her methamphetamine addiction, her mental state, the shame and fear she felt. They said she was not in her right mind during those years. They brought up her difficult circumstances, though details about her early life remain limited. They argued that she was a product of her situation, that the substance use had essentially turned her into a different person, one who was capable of things the sober Megan would never have done. They pointed out that once she got clean, the incident stopped. Doesn't that prove, they asked, that the drug use was the driving factor? They asked for understanding, for recognition that addiction is a serious issue and that Megan was affected by that condition as much as her babies were affected by her actions, but even they couldn't fully explain it. Because this wasn't a single act of desperation. This was 6 separate decisions spread out over a decade, each one requiring planning and concealment. Each pregnancy lasted 9 months. That's 9 months to change your mind, to seek help, to make a different choice. And Megan had that opportunity 6 times. 6 9-month periods where she could have walked into a hospital, a church, a fire station, a police station, and said, "I need help. I'm pregnant and I don't know what to do." And someone would have helped her. Someone would have found resources, arranged an adoption, connected her with counseling. But she never did that. She chose concealment instead. So what was going on in Megan Huntsman's mind? Experts in criminal psychology have terms for what she did. When a mother ends a child's life within the first 24 hours, it's called neonatal infanticide. It's different from other types of harm to children because it often involves denial of pregnancy, extreme shame, fear of judgment, and a kind of emotional dissociation where the mother doesn't fully accept the reality of the baby as a living person. Studies show that women who commit neonatal infanticide are often young, isolated, and terrified of the consequences of the pregnancy becoming known. They're usually unmarried teenagers who hid the pregnancy from their parents. They give birth alone, panic, and in a moment of desperation, they cause the baby's death or leave it alone. It's tragic, it's criminal, but there's usually a clear psychological profile. But Megan doesn't fit that profile neatly. She wasn't a teenager. She was an adult woman with other children. She wasn't completely isolated. She had a husband and a community, even if she kept to herself. She wasn't a first-time mother who didn't know what to do with a baby. She'd already successfully raised 3 daughters. She knew how to care for an infant. She knew what pregnancy and childbirth entailed. So why did she harm 6 more babies when she already had the knowledge and experience to care for them? What Megan did is actually closer to something even more unusual: serial infanticide. That's when a mother causes the deaths of multiple children over time. It's extremely uncommon. Most cases of neonatal infanticide involve 1 baby, born to a young or frightened mother who panics. But 6 babies over 10 years? That's not panic. That's a pattern. And pattern suggests choice. It suggests that each time Megan got pregnant, she made the decision not to seek help, not to tell anyone, and not to let the baby live. The substance use might have impaired her judgment. It might have made her paranoid or detached. But it doesn't explain the consistency. It doesn't explain why 6 separate times she chose this path over any other option. Some people have asked why she didn't just give the babies up for adoption. Utah has safe haven laws, which allow parents to surrender a newborn at a hospital or fire station with no questions asked and no legal consequences. These laws exist specifically to prevent situations like this. They're designed to give desperate mothers an option, a way to ensure their baby is cared for without facing criminal charges. Megan could have driven to any hospital in Utah, walked in with a newborn, said, "I can't care for this baby," and walked out. No arrest, no charges. The baby would have been placed with social services and eventually adopted. It happens all the time. But she didn't do that. Some have asked why she didn't terminate the pregnancies medically. Utah has restrictions, but it was legal and accessible during the years Megan was getting pregnant, especially in the 1990s and early 2000s. She could have gone to a clinic, had the procedure done safely and legally, and no one would have needed to know she'd been pregnant. But she didn't do that either. Instead, she chose the most harmful and secretive option available to her. She let the pregnancies go to full term, endured 9 months of physical changes and discomfort, went through the pain and danger of unassisted childbirth, gave birth to living babies, and then ended their lives with her own hands. Why? That's the question that haunts everyone who studies this case. And Megan hasn't given a clear answer. Even in her confession, she was vague. She said she didn't want the babies. She said she was using substances. But she never explained the why in a way that makes sense to anyone else. One theory is that Megan was living in a state of profound denial. Psychologists call this dissociation. It's when your mind creates a barrier between different parts of your reality because the full truth is too overwhelming to process. Maybe Megan couldn't consciously admit to herself that she was pregnant until it was too late to do anything about it. Maybe by the time labor started, she felt trapped. She couldn't suddenly reveal a pregnancy she'd been hiding for 9 months. People would ask questions. They'd want to know why she hid it. They'd judge her. So she gave birth in secret, and then in a moment of panic and desperation, she ended the baby's life to keep the secret. And then, after doing it once, maybe it became easier the second time. And the third? And by the 6th time, it was almost routine. This is one of the most disturbing possibilities because it suggests that Megan became desensitized to what she was doing. That each incident made the next one easier. Another theory involves the methamphetamine more directly. Long-term substance use doesn't just impair your judgment in the moment. It actually changes your brain structure. It damages the parts of your brain responsible for empathy, emotional regulation, and long-term planning. People who've used certain substances heavily for years often show reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that helps you make moral decisions and consider consequences. So it's possible that by the time Megan was several years into her addiction, her brain was literally incapable of processing the moral weight of what she was doing. She might have seen the babies as problems to be solved rather than lives to be protected. In her altered state of mind, ending their lives might have seemed like the logical solution to the problem of an unwanted pregnancy. But here's what troubles people about that explanation. If substances destroyed her ability to feel empathy or make moral judgments, why didn't she harm her 3 living daughters? Why was she able to be a functional mother to them, while simultaneously causing the deaths of their siblings? That suggests that she was capable of making distinctions, that some part of her brain was still working normally. She knew the difference between the children she wanted and the ones she didn't. And that's what makes this so chilling. It suggests that on some level, Megan was making conscious choices about which of her children deserved to live and which ones didn't. Let's talk about the daughters. Megan's 3 living daughters were adults by the time the bodies were discovered in 2014. The youngest would have been in her late teens or early 20s. The oldest might have been in her 30s. They released a brief statement through an attorney saying they were devastated and trying to process the news. They asked for privacy. And honestly, who can blame them? Imagine finding out that your childhood home was a crime scene. That your mother, who raised you, was also responsible for these deaths. That you have 7 siblings you never got to meet because your mother decided they didn't deserve to live. The psychological impact on these daughters is almost impossible to measure. They didn't just lose their mother to prison. They lost their entire understanding of who their mother was. Every memory they have of childhood is now affected by this knowledge. Birthday parties where mom made cake and smiled for pictures. School events where mom sat in the audience and cheered. Family dinners where mom asked about their day. All of those memories now exist alongside the knowledge that at some point during their childhood, maybe even on one of those special days, their mother gave birth to a baby in secret and caused its death. How do you hold both of those realities in your mind at the same time? How do you remember your mother tucking you into bed while also knowing she was ending newborns' lives in the bathroom? And then there's the survivor's guilt. Why did we get to live when they didn't? What made us different? Was it just timing? If mom had gotten pregnant with us during her addiction years, would we have been harmed too? These are questions that don't have good answers, but the daughters probably ask them anyway. Therapy can help people process trauma, but it can't undo it. These women will carry this for the rest of their lives. There's also the practical consideration of identity. These daughters have to navigate the world knowing that if anyone searches their mother's name online, they'll find this story. They might have changed their names. They've certainly had to decide whether to tell friends, romantic partners, future children about their family history. Do you tell someone on a first date that your mom is in prison for causing the deaths of 6 babies? Do you tell your own children that their grandmother did these things? There's no guidebook for how to handle that. And there's no way to escape it because this case was widely publicized. It made national news. It's been covered in true crime documentaries and podcasts. The daughters can't just move to a new town and start fresh because the internet exists forever. The community of Pleasant Grove was shattered. Neighbors told reporters they were in disbelief. One neighbor said Megan seemed like a normal mom. Another said they'd never seen her pregnant during those years, which in hindsight is concerning. How do you live next door to someone for years and not notice 7 pregnancies? But that's the thing. Megan was intentional about hiding it. She knew what she was doing, and she was effective at it. For 10 years, she kept a secret that most people couldn't keep for 10 days. That takes planning. That takes control. And that's what makes this so deeply unsettling. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was sustained, deliberate concealment. Some neighbors reported that they'd occasionally heard strange sounds from the house but never thought much of it. Maybe they heard Megan in labor and thought it was just someone upset or sick. In suburban neighborhoods, people generally mind their own business. You hear noise from a neighbor's house and you assume it's none of your concern. But now those neighbors have to live with the thought that maybe if they'd knocked on the door, if they'd asked if everything was okay, maybe one of those babies could have been saved. It's not their fault. They had no reason to suspect what was happening. But guilt doesn't always follow logic. The house itself became a local landmark for all the wrong reasons. For a while, people would drive by slowly, pointing it out to passengers. True crime enthusiasts would take pictures. The city of Pleasant Grove had to deal with the unwanted attention. This was a community that prided itself on being safe and family-friendly, and suddenly it was known as the place where a mother caused the deaths of 6 babies. That reputation stuck. Even now, more than a decade later, if you mention Pleasant Grove to someone who follows true crime, they'll probably remember the Megan Huntsman case. The Pleasant Grove Police Department had to deal with the aftermath too. For the officers who responded to that initial call, who saw those tiny bodies in boxes, the psychological impact was real. First responders are trained to handle traumatic scenes, but there are some things that training can't fully prepare you for. Investigators who worked the case have said in interviews that it stayed with them. You don't just go home after processing a scene like that and forget about it. You think about those babies. You think about what their last moments were like. You think about the fact that they never got a chance at life. Some of the officers involved in the case sought counseling afterward. The medical examiner's office faced unique challenges too. Determining cause of death on remains that had been stored in a garage for up to 18 years is incredibly difficult. Soft tissue had decomposed. There were no witnesses. The only evidence was the condition of the remains and Megan's confession. The medical examiner had to rely on bone structure, positioning, and whatever physical evidence remained to confirm that these babies had indeed been harmed, rather than passing away from natural causes. It was meticulous, heartbreaking work. So let's come back to the title. Mother ends son's life for ruining her new relationship. That's not what happened here. Megan Huntsman didn't cause these deaths because of a boyfriend or a new romance. She ended 6 babies' lives over the course of a decade, and the reason remains unclear at best. Was it the substance use? Partially, maybe. Was it shame, fear? A complete detachment from reality? Probably all of those things mixed together in a way that's hard for any of us to fully understand. But here's what we do know. 7 babies were born in that house. 6 of them passed away. Their bodies were stored in a garage. And for years, life just went on. Megan raised her other children. Darren went to work. The neighbors mowed their lawns. And nobody knew. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how well we really know the people around us. It challenges the assumption that mothers are inherently protective of their children. It shows us that addiction can change a person's mind and moral compass in ways that seem incomprehensible to those of us who've never experienced it. But it also shows us that harmful behavior doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like a quiet woman in a suburban neighborhood who keeps to herself and doesn't cause any trouble. Megan Huntsman is currently serving her sentence at the Utah State Correctional Facility, which houses both male and female inmates. She's now in her 50s. By all accounts, she's been a model prisoner. She hasn't caused problems. She participates in available programs. She keeps to herself just like she did on the outside. In 2044, when she's eligible for parole, she'll be in her 70s. The parole board will have to decide if a woman who caused the deaths of 6 of her own babies deserves a second chance at freedom. That's going to be an incredibly difficult decision. On one hand, she's served her time, followed the rules, and presumably expressed remorse for what she did. On the other hand, what she did was so serious, so beyond normal human behavior, that many people will argue she should never be released. If Megan is eventually paroled, where would she even go? Her daughters likely want nothing to do with her. Darren West moved on with his life years ago. The community of Pleasant Grove certainly wouldn't welcome her back. She'd face significant challenges, a woman known nationwide for causing the deaths of her own children. She'd have to live under constant supervision, probably required to check in regularly with a parole officer, restricted from certain activities and locations. And she'd have to live with the knowledge of what she did for whatever years she has left. But even if she serves every day of her sentence, even if she never walks free again, it doesn't bring back those 6 babies. It doesn't undo the trauma inflicted on her living daughters. And it doesn't answer the question that keeps us all thinking, how does someone do this? How does a mother give birth to a baby, hear it cry, feel it move in her hands, and then decide in that moment to end its life? And how does someone do that 6 times? Those are questions we may never have satisfying answers to. We can talk about addiction and mental health and dissociation and brain chemistry. We can analyze and theorize and try to understand. But at the end of the day, some acts are so far outside the bounds of normal human behavior that they remain incomprehensible. This is the story of 7 babies who never got to take a breath outside their mother's home. It's the story of 3 daughters who have to live with the knowledge of what their mother did. And it's the story of a woman who, for reasons we may never fully understand, decided that the lives of her own children were worth less than keeping a secret. Those babies didn't get names. They didn't get birth certificates. They didn't get to see sunlight or feel a gentle touch or hear a lullaby. They got plastic bags and cardboard boxes in a garage in Pleasant Grove, Utah, and that's the real tragedy here. Not just that they passed away, but that they were treated as disposable. As problems to be hidden rather than lives to be celebrated. I'm your host, This is Accused. If this case affected you, please reach out to someone you trust or contact a mental health professional. The National Maternal Mental Health Hotline is available at 1-833-943-5746 for anyone struggling with pregnancy, postpartum issues, or parenting stress. There are resources available, and you don't have to face things alone. Subscribe for more cases that make us question everything we think we know about human nature. Comment below with your thoughts, but please be respectful. These are real lives, real families, real trauma. And remember, justice isn't just about punishment. It's about never forgetting. It's about bearing witness to these babies who never got a chance to speak for themselves. It's about making sure that their brief existence mattered, even if their own mother decided it didn't.